Welcome to Verdict Vantage, covering breaking news stories. Thank you for supporting our research. We would like to extend a trigger warning before we continue. Please be advised.
This video contains discussions about true crime, which may include topics such as violence, assault, and other distressing incidents. Viewer discretion is advised.
If you are interested in our future coverage of this story, be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell before you go. Verdict Vantage thanks you for supporting our continued news coverage and research.
Hello guys, welcome to Trap Time. Thank you for being here. If you're watching this, this is on a premiere, so feel free to chat below when you are seeing this. We do have a special guest who I'm going to bring up, who is going to tell her story. This is Nina. Nina, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Trevor.
Absolutely. You want to tell everybody who you are and just kind of get started?
Absolutely. So my name is Nina Gomez, as a lot of you know. I am Faith Proudfoot's mother. Christopher Proudfoot is Faith's father, biologically. And I'm here to tell my story of what happened to myself and to my children.
Absolutely, and I think it's a story that needs to be heard. So if you want to just open us up with the beginning of your story and just get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, my name is Nina. I live here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I have 3 amazing children. I met Christopher back when I was 35 years old. I met him on a dating website. Don't know what I was doing there, I guess. I wish I could take it back. I started talking to him. He was stationed out in San Diego, and we started talking back and forth. Wanted to get to know him a little bit more. I thought he was a great person in the beginning. But everybody is always perfect in the beginning, right? We fail to see the red flags, and we fail to notice things that we should in the beginning. So he made a couple of trips out here, asked me to marry him, and I made the mistake by saying I do. So we got married. Eventually we moved to San Diego. I wasn't really ever prepared to move away again from New Mexico. I had went through a divorce a couple years prior to meeting Christopher. And my first husband was military as well, but I was married to him for 9.5 to 10 years, almost 10 years. We made it. He's the father of my other 2 children. And I told him that, I was remarrying and we were moving to San Diego. And he wasn't really for it. He was kind of against it due to the fact that he was stationed out at Fort Bliss, which is in El Paso, Texas. And that's about like 3.5 hours from Albuquerque. So he was, he would always see his kids like every weekend. And he's like, how am I going to see my kids? And I said, well, we'll figure it out. So we packed up after we said I do. I don't remember the exact date when I got married to Christopher, and maybe that's a good thing. We moved into the naval housing out there, and my son, Noah, was 3 at the time, and my oldest was about 7 years old. And she was telling me 7. So I thought everything was great in the beginning. I mean, everything's always perfect, like I said. And then I started seeing bits and pieces of how Christopher really was. I was a stay-at-home wife. Due to my son being so young, I wanted to, enjoy those years with him. Then my daughter went to school right down the street. So I was home every single day. And it just started seeing like Christopher change like night and day. It was awkward. I felt really uncomfortable. After a while, we would argue about just the smallest things. And a lot of it also had to do with how he disciplined my children. I'm very protective over my kids. And I didn't want somebody else to discipline my children. I didn't want him talking ugly to them, or hurting their feelings. And I remember one point in time where Christopher spanked my son really hard, and I got very upset with him, and I said, you can't do that to my son. I said, he's 3, he's a baby still. Like, you can't just do whatever you want. I mean, and he got upset, and he's like, well, he needs to learn. He needs to man up. He's a man. I said, he's 3. He's 3. And as time went on, like, I could see him getting more aggressive and more aggressive. And I stood up for my kids all the time. I didn't like how he talked to them, how he wanted them to stand in the corner all the time. And I didn't like that. So I stayed a little bit longer. I ended up eventually getting pregnant with Faith. And it was probably, I want to say, maybe early September that I found out that I was pregnant with Faith. And I remember telling him that I was pregnant, and he wasn't happy about it. So I called my parents back home here in Albuquerque, and I told them the situation. And I said, well, Christopher wants me to get an abortion with Faith. And my parents said, no, you're not. And I said, I'm not. So I know he was very upset about me keeping Faith at that point in time. So I came home. My grandma had gotten very sick, and I decided to come home. And after that, I just kind of stayed here in New Mexico, because at that time we weren't getting along, and we were just like newlyweds, and that should have never happened. But I saw things, like I said, that were just it wasn't right about him. So I moved home, and I did my whole pregnancy by myself. And so I finally, my friends back there in California, my neighbors right across the street, were actually calling me. I had one good friend, which is still a really good friend of mine to this day. She called me and said, Nina, Christopher's getting rid of your furniture and getting rid of your stuff. And I was like, what? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, he's giving away like your little, your home decor stuff. Like, he's giving away beds. And I was like, no way. So this was about Easter time. So I had went out there. I made a special trip. I asked my mom to go with me. And Isabella and Noah, they went with me. And I was still pregnant with Faith at the time. So we made it. I didn't tell him that we were going out there. So I kind of, wanted to see myself because the neighbor also informed me that there was people at the house that shouldn't have been there. So I guess I kind of wanted to sneak up on him and see what he was doing, right? And we pulled up into the driveway, into the driveway, and he was coming out the front door with a bed that he was giving to the neighbor, which was my son's bed. And the look on his face was like a deer in headlights. And he dropped the bed right there in the front yard, went back in the front door, slammed the door and locked it on my kids. And my mom told me at that point, she said, I can't believe he's doing this. Like, what is he doing? So I go in and I unlock the door and I said, what are you doing? I said, are you giving away my stuff? And he had nothing to say. So he brought the bed back in because I knew that's what he was doing. And, the neighbor across the street, like I said, told me. So we stayed there. It was super uncomfortable. My mom felt the tension between the both of us. My children felt it as well. And at the time, Faith started moving. Like I could start, I felt her moving around in my stomach. And I told Christopher, I said, look, I said, put your hand on my stomach. I said, can you feel her move? He said, no. When you're pregnant, you always think that your spouse is going to be super supportive and be super excited that you're pregnant and bringing a life into this world for him, right? But I didn't get that. I didn't get that support that I needed. So we had a conversation my mom brought up between Christopher, myself, and her. And she had said, do you not want Faith? Like, do you not want this baby? And Christopher stated to my mom, he wasn't happy. And he said, what if one of them dies? What if Faith dies or Nina dies on the table or when she's having this baby? Like my mom said, don't talk like that. Like, why are you talking like that? They're still here. So we left again after a couple days. We came home to Albuquerque. And still, I tried working it out where we were at, but it just wasn't working. I wanted out. And I had Faith on my own. Christopher called the hospital. I told him on June 1st that I got admitted into the hospital. And Faith arrived at June 2nd, about 3 or 4 in the morning. And he kept calling the hospital and saying that my wife is in labor, she's there. But Christopher was just so rude and hateful, and just due to the fact that they heard Christopher over the phone on how he was being disrespectful to the nurses that were on call that night, as I was waiting to have her. And I asked that they not give him any more information. So he arrived. I had Faith. He arrived a couple days later, like I said. And you could just tell the look on his face, like he wasn't happy at all. Like, didn't say, hey, you did a good job. Didn't say, I'm so happy that you brought my daughter into this world. Like, nothing. And I remember my sister was holding Faith, and she had to ask Chris, do you want to hold her? said, I guess. So she handed her over to Chris. And he stayed there with me for a couple more days because I had a C-section. And on one of the occasions, I can't recall what was happening, but he was raising his voice and he was talking to me very disrespectful in front of one of the nurses. And she had told him, look, she just brought life into this world. She just got major surgery and you're yelling at her, and I have a problem with that. She said, if you continue to do this, I'm going to have to tell social services to come down here, and I'm also going to have to ask you to leave the hospital and not return. So at that point in time, he kind of calmed down after he heard that. But unfortunately, that didn't last very long. He continued to do that. So social services at the hospital was told to come down, and he was pretty much, she said, you can't do that here. And she was really concerned for my well-being at the time, and also Faith's, because, here is Christopher, dictating and telling me what I can and can't do, and telling the nurses to do their job correctly and all these other things, and raising his voice at me. And, so they had to step in. And so she said, this is it. Like, you're going to have to leave the premises. And, and he got a little upset, and he's like, no, I'm going to change. I'm going to be good. So, they said, okay, but we're watching you. We're watching you. So after that, we had left. They discharged all of us from the hospital, and he didn't want to stay at my parents' house because my mom and dad live in a trailer, and he doesn't like that. It's a house, right? Still. So he rented a room at Kirtland Air Force Base, and they have like lodging there, which is like a house, old base housing, and we ended up getting one of those. And we stayed there for a while. I remember one night in particular where we all had went out and got something to eat to bring it back to the room. I had went into the restroom, I believe that's where I was at, and Faith was in her car seat, and my oldest daughter was in the living room with my son and Christopher. Well, anyways, I guess I wasn't moving fast enough for Christopher, but the baby started crying. Faith started crying. And, she's crying, and I'm trying to get to her as fast as I can. And when she was in the car seat, my oldest daughter at the time witnessed this with my 3-year-old son. When she was in the car seat, he ended up hitting the car seat against the wall. And he's getting upset because she's crying. And then when she was in her car seat, there was a coffee table right there, and he ended up tossing her on the coffee table with the car seat because he was so irate that she was crying. And I said, hey, what's your problem? I said, what are you doing? Like, she's a baby. She's going to cry. I wish I would have just... I wish I would have never met him. I'm sorry. I should have left a long time ago. Because no children ever deserve this. My kids didn't. So he left again to San Diego. A couple of days went by. Then all of a sudden he's like, well, you know, why don't you move to Hendersonville? And I was like, why though? You know, in my head, and I knew it was a bad idea. I just knew it. I knew it because our marriage was on the rocks. I wasn't happy. He wasn't a good father figure to my children. I don't know why I said yes. Well, anyways, so let me back up. So before he left back to San Diego, Faith ended up going back into the NICU. She ended up getting jaundice, and she went back to the NICU. So she was in the NICU, I want to say, for a week to a week and a half. And that was when Kathy, Chris's mother, came out, flew down with her brother, Duran Guy, or they call him Big D. They came down, and she was in the NICU. And that was when I felt like a plan was made, because like I said, our marriages it was on the rocks. And one of my neighbors had told me in San Diego, they had warned me. They had said, Nina, be careful, because Christopher is coming up with a plan with his mother. And they're planning on taking the baby away from you. And I was like, what? Like, thinking to myself, it can't be true from somebody that's supposed to love you, right? Like somebody that you're supposed to share your life with. Like, why would he want to take the baby away from me? And she warned me. But I was like, no, why would they do that? So then after Faith got out of the NICU, we were no longer staying in base housing. We were staying at one of the NBC suites down here. Then his mom came up with an idea. She goes, well, since you guys, you know, will be moving to Hendersonville. And I was like, I felt like, okay, well, maybe. And he's like, well, you'll get help. You're going to get help from my family. And, you know, but I was already getting help here from my parents, you know, with my other two children that they helped me raise. So that I went along with it. Like I said earlier, even though I knew it was wrong to go, I still went, hoping that my marriage would work out. So she ended up taking Faith, although I was against it. Kathy Bowers-Hawks and her brother Duran ended up taking Faith. And my mom and dad were like, my mom started crying, and she goes, why are you letting them take the baby? And I said, because Christopher said that it's going to be too hard for her to travel, you know, to travel. And I'm sorry. They went back. So Kathy and Big D went back to Tennessee. So 2 weeks later, about 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks later, Kathy ended up coming back by herself. I do apologize. She came back by herself to pick up Faith. She was here in Albuquerque for one night, and I was, even though I was against it, I let her go with Kathy, because Christopher said it was going to be too hard to travel with her being a new baby. So he came out from San Diego, rented a U-Haul, packed all our stuff, and we pretty much left. And that's how I ended up in Hendersonville, Tennessee. That's when my whole life changed. That's when my nightmare happened. We lived with his mother and his stepfather, Terry, for about a good month, because our apartment wasn't going to be ready until the end of August, about the end of August. So it was really uncomfortable living there. You know, Terry and Kathy would always bicker at each other, and she'd be bickering with Christopher, and, you know, my kids were a problem, an issue. It was always something. I felt really uncomfortable, and I wanted to come home. I just wanted to come home to everything that I knew. I wanted my mom and my dad, even though I was a grown woman. I needed that. So we all had to get along, tried to for the most part, but it was just an awkward situation. I always felt like we were the outcast. Never felt accepted by the Proudfoots or the Bowersocks. On one occasion, Christopher was cutting my oldest daughter's nails, and she didn't want her nails cut. And Christopher, you know, grabbed a hold of her hand, and she pulled her hand away. And my daughter at the time had braces. He backhand Isabel in the face and busted her whole lip open. I should have left, but I didn't. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't be here. I don't want to be here anymore. So I would come up with every excuse just to come home, but yet, you know, I couldn't come home. So finally we went and we moved into the apartment. And a phone call, like as soon as Christopher was leaving, he settled us in, got a storage unit of what couldn't fit in the apartment. He got everything ready, all right? Him and his family. As soon as he knew that we were comfortable, he left back to San Diego. But the night prior to him leaving, he had got a phone call or text message that night, and it said something like, hey baby, or around something like that, saying that when is your flight coming in? And I was like, what? Like, who's texting him? So I did confront him, and like he said on one of the podcasts is that I did slap him. Yes, I did slap him across the face, because who's he talking to at this time and saying, and I mean, he could say that she was lesbian, I mean, up and down, but I mean, at this point in time, I didn't know what to believe, and I was like, okay. So then after that following day, he finally left. His mother came to pick him up to take him to the airport, and he went back to San Diego. And I was left in Hendersonville with 3 children and pretty much no help from anybody. So I have found a job. I had a job, and Kathy helped once in a while, and I needed to find a babysitter. So his biological father, Michael, and his stepmother, Linda, at that point in time offered their services and said that, you know, they can take care of my 2 older children. And Kathy didn't want Faith going over to Michael's house, so she took care of her. And At that point in time, Christopher, we were still communicating. And like I said, our relationship, our marriage was on the rocks. So my oldest daughter had gotten sick and she has upper respiratory issues. So I took her to the emergency room in Hendersonville, and that's when Hendersonville transferred her to Vanderbilt. Is that what I believe that hospital's name is? And I was kind of frantic because I was like, well, what am I going to do with my 3-year-old son and with the baby? Like, who's going to help me? So I was, I called Chris and I told him, I said, hey, I said, can your mom watch, Faith, or can somebody help me? Everybody was so quick to help me at that point in time. So Faith stayed with Kathy and Noah Bryce went with his sister, Melissa. And I went with my oldest daughter. We got transported downtown. And so we stayed there. I can't recall how many days we were there. And Christopher had, I'd check on the kids, see how they were doing. And that point in time, I was like, okay, well, we got discharged, telling everybody, okay, you can bring Noah back, and telling Kathy, okay, I'm going to be home so you can bring Faith back. Thinking that my children were going to come home to me. I get back to the apartment complex and I pulled into the parking lot and I see Melissa just pulled in right next to me. It seems like they were already there waiting for me to get there. And then she said, I can't stay. I would love to stay, but I can't stay because I don't know what they were doing. And she does, my son gets out of her van. And then we walk inside and I was waiting, for Faith to get there. And we weren't there but less than maybe 5 minutes. And I hear a knock at the door. And I was like, oh, great, Faith is home. And it was Kathy's friend, Patty, that's an attorney. And she said, called me by my real name, Gomez? And I was like, yeah. And she said, you've been served. She said, you have a protection order against you. You can't see Faith. And Chris is filing for divorce. And I was like, what? So then I go back, and thinking like my heart just drops. Like, what? Like, is this a dream? Like, this can't be happening to me. Like, this cannot be happening to me right now. So then I get on the phone and I try calling Chris and he didn't answer. And then I was like, rushing around and I get my kids in the truck and I go to the Gallatin police department and I, was ringing the call button. And finally 30 minutes later, somebody shows up and I told them what happened and I showed them the paper and they said, yep, we can't help you. All I can think about is my baby. Like, how am I going to get my baby back? Like, why is this happening to me? So I go to Kathy's house and I knock on the door. And I remember I had Christopher's stepmom, Linda, on the phone with me. She was on speakerphone and I told her what was going on. Little did I know everybody was in on this. And Terry answered the door, which is Chris's stepfather. And he told me that I need to get off of his fucking property. And here little Noah, who's 3 years old, and my Isabella is 7. And they're standing behind me. And I said, please tell me what's going on. I said, where's Faith? I said, please give me my baby back. And he told me, get off my fucking property. And he took out a green and black baseball bat. And he told me to fucking leave or he's gonna bash me and my kids' heads. So me and my kids walked back to my truck and we got back in it. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? This is a nightmare. What am I gonna do? And Chris was inside of the house with the baby. I saw his shadow. And they lied for him and they said that he was in California and he really wasn't. So we go back to the apartment and I'm trying to gather all my thoughts together. I'm trying to keep as calm as I can for my other 2 children, but all I could do was just cry. And just think, like, what is my next move? What am I going to do now? I'm so far away from home. I'm far away from my parents. I'm far away from everything that I've ever known. So then I make a call to my brother, who, he lives in Phoenix. And I told him what was going on, and he was so upset. And he's like, oh my God. And he's like, have you called Mom and Dad yet? And I said, no. And he told me himself that day, he said, you're going to fight. You're going to fight like hell to get Faith back. You don't leave that baby in that state. You fight like hell to get her back, whatever it takes. And that's what I did. I called my mom and dad. And it had to happen after midnight here, so about like 1 something our time there. My dad answered the phone. And I couldn't talk. All I could do is cry. I couldn't get the words out. And finally he said, calm down. Please calm down and tell me what happened. And I told him, I said, Daddy, they took my baby. And all he could get out is, oh no, they hurt my baby. And he started crying. And he woke my mom up. And he said, you hang in there, we're on our way. So every single day, I worked at a local Great Flips out there. And I went in from the time it opened to the time it closed. That following morning, after all this had happened, I went to my bank account and to my savings. I've been saving money through this whole entire time, but I've been using it since we were out there so I can help support my kids and myself. But little did I know that Christopher wanted me to use all my money because he didn't want me to have anything so I wouldn't retain a lawyer. So that morning before I went to work and dropped my kids off, at the time, Michael and Linda, which is Christopher's biological father, and his stepmother were still helping me watch my kids because I still had to work. And I went into my bank account, and I remember I only had $1,100 in there. And I was looking through the phone book, or looking through, my phone, and saying, well, I need to get a lawyer. Who can I get? Thank God for Mr. Edwards, because I went into his office before, I called into work that day pretty much, and I said, I need to just think. I said, I need a day off. So I went into his office, and I ended up doing a consultation with him. And I remember him, he told me what his fees were, and he told me, I told him the situation. And he was in shock, and he goes, my God, he goes, this all happened? Like, you should have never came out here. And I said, I know, I should have never came out here. So at the time, I explained the situation to Mr. Edwards, and I was crying. And I said, Mr. Edwards, I said, I just want my baby back. And then I remember I still had my wedding ring on at that point in time. And I slipped off my wedding ring, and I sat it on his desk. And he looks at me, and I said, please, sir, I would do anything just for my baby back. He said, you're all I have. Please help me. I remember he took out his little magnifying glass, and he looked at it, and he put his head down, and he goes, God. He goes, I work for money. I said, and I know, sir. I said, and I promise I will pay you every dime that I can. Just help me bring my baby home. And he said, you got yourself a lawyer. And he fought. He fought like hell for faith. We went to, everything happened in Gallatin Courthouse. My parents were there. We went to the first trial, and I remember walking in the courthouse, and my stomach was turning. I hadn't seen my baby. And they had my baby there. Just in arm's reach, and I couldn't even hold her, and I couldn't even kiss her, and I couldn't even tell her I love her. So we went to trial. I don't know what you want to call it, a trial, a hearing. I think I was just so oblivious to everything at that point because I was so heartbroken that my baby was gone. And we go into the courtroom, and all I had was my dad in there. And their side all the benches filled up with his family being loud and laughing. And it was just my daddy and me and Mr. Edward. And I remember the judge, his attorney, just everybody in there. All the hurtful things that they put on black and white about me. Just the eyes glaring at me and making it seem like I was a bad person. And I sat there. And he asked me a couple of questions, and I answered. One of them was, "Why did you move out here, Miss Proudfoot?" I said, "Your Honor, to try to make my marriage work," said in which it didn't. I said I made a mistake by coming out here. I made a mistake by trusting somebody. And I said if I could change back the hands of time, I probably wouldn't have even came out here. And they did whatever they were doing, and then the judge, said that I only had visitation with Faith, and they all had to be supervised. So then the supervised visitations started happening, and we would visit Faith. And I remember one visitation that had happened at a park. I can't recall the park's name, but there was a duck pond and really nice playground for the kids. And I remember Kathy showing up with Faith. And we all sat there, got Faith out of the car seat, and I was slamming on her and kissing her and telling her how much I love her, how much we missed her. And I handed her to her big sister. And I took a picture of those two. And my oldest daughter was crying. We only had about, I believe it was between 20 and 30 minutes of visitation with Faith once a week, if I'm right. There's a lot of things that after so many years, it's hard. Like, I just remember, like, the big things that happened, and that was one of them. It was between 20 and 30 minutes. And my son was there. And then Kathy got her ready to leave. They had to leave first, and then we left after. I remember holding my son and my daughter's hand, and we're walking back to my vehicle. And my son started crying. And I started crying, and then my daughter started crying. And he said, "Mama, I'm gonna run super fast, Mama. I'm gonna go grab Faith, and you meet me on the other side of the park, Mama. I'm gonna run so fast, and then you drive off, Mama." the pain that Christopher and his family has brought to my family is pain that we'll never forget. Pain that we live with every single day of our lives. And I remember that very clear. And we went home. We had another trial a couple weeks later. Was I believe I want to say it was in maybe November, either in October or November. I can't recall the date. But at that trial, I was praying to God and to my God that we were going to bring Faith home. And we went to that courthouse, and with my mom and dad and Isabella and Noah. At this point in time, my mom was going to testify against Christopher. My daughter was going to testify against Christopher. And they had said, his lawyer at the time had said, don't let her daughter testify. And so we went without it, nobody testifying that day. Christopher had ended up getting, he was talking at the time. Judge was asking him all kinds of questions. And he made me look like a monster. He made me look like I was the problem. He made me feel awful about myself and saying all these things in front of these people that weren't even true. It wasn't even true. And then it came to my attorney talking. And at that point in time, I was just like, gosh, like, oh God, please let a miracle, just like, let this just be over with. When people tell lies and when they say hurtful things about you, you just feel so disgusting about yourself. And that's the way I felt. And I remember we needed to break and come back. And Mr. Edwards at that point in time went into the chambers with the judge. And I don't know what was being said, being done back there, but he was in there for a while. And he ended up coming back out. Court was back in session. Everything was, we were going back and forth again. And at some point in time, the judge just had enough. The judge was done hearing everything that had happened. And Christopher, was speaking, and the judge just said, that's enough. Like, I don't want to even hear what you have to say anymore. He's like, you premeditated this? This was premeditated. You knew exactly what you and your family were doing. You brought this woman out here with her children, and you guys knew exactly what you were doing. And he said, 8:30, Gallatin's Sheriff's Department, that's where the exchange is going to happen. My heart just dropped, like, and my attorney looks at me and he said, you just won. you won. And I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit my knees, and all I could think about is, I couldn't wait to wrap my arms around my baby again. And the judge, everybody was hysterical on his side, of course, and my daughter and my mom were waiting out there. And I remember his uncle going out there, and he swung open the door, and he was so angry. And my daughter overheard him say, "She won. She won." And I remember my dad was still sitting behind me, and he had tears in his eyes, and he's like, "Let's go." And my attorney followed me outside, and we went out, and there was just so much chaos coming from the Proudfoots, and we went outside very humbly, and he took us in back of the courthouse the other way, and right there and then I hit my knees. I finally could be relieved, a big, oh my God, we did this. And he said, 8:30, go pick her up. I said, "Thank you, Mr. Edwards." I said, I owe you my life to you helped me get my baby back. So then we went back to our truck, and we went back to the apartment. We packed what we could, and we pretty much left everything else behind in the storage unit. At that time, I didn't need anything. Because I had everything I've ever wanted. So I remember my dad saying, "Come on, we gotta go." So we went to the sheriff's department, and we showed up, and I remember I told my dad, I said, "Wait here." I said, "Stay at that Wendy's." So my dad stayed at that Wendy's waiting for me, and he said, "Okay." He's like, "You call me when you're on your way so I can follow you out, okay?" And I said, "Okay, Dad." We got to the sheriff's department. Christopher and his Michael, Linda, Kathy, Big D, Melissa, his whole entire family was there. So then the exchange was happening, and they live streamed me on Facebook. They said, "I can't believe the judge awarded her custody." I was just standing there, I remember, and I said, "Can I have my baby back, please?" And I remember his mother had her phone in her hand, or his mother, yes, and she had a brown paper sack full of diapers and a dirty bottle, and she threw it at me, and she said, "I think you're gonna need this," laughing. Then I said, "Thank you." And my two younger children were sitting in the back. And then I said, "Okay, can I have Faith back now?" So I forget if it was Kathy or Chris, but they tossed her at me, and I caught her. And I said, thank you. So then I get her in her car seat, trying to buckle her up and telling my kids, I said, you need to buckle up. I said, okay, we're going to leave. I remember at the time, my front door had opened at that time, and Christopher got inside of my driver's seat of my truck. And everybody was still filming, live streaming me on Facebook. And Melissa Proudfoot had said, why don't you put it in reverse and drive over her? And I told my kids, I said, get out. I'm trying to get Faith out again. And I told my kids, and I remember he put the truck in reverse. And I told my kids, I said, get out. I said, jump, get out. And I remember them getting out as fast as they could. And we're running into the sheriff's department, and I had Faith, and I'm running, and I'm yelling, and I'm asking for help. I said, somebody please help me. Nobody came out. And then finally, he came in, Christopher, behind me. And finally, they opened the door. And they put me in a back room with my kids. They turned the lights off on us. In the process of me calling my attorney to tell him what was going on, Kathy disconnected my cell phone. And I remember Mr. Edwards calling the police department and telling them they need to let me go. And at the time, Christopher was still in the military. And Mr. Edwards, I remember them telling him, you need to she needs to go, because this could possibly cause Mr. Proudfoot his career. So at that point in time, I got escorted outside by a couple of sheriffs that were there. They seemed like they knew each other, all of them, the Proudfoots. And I remember Christopher had asked one of the sheriffs if he could say goodbye to Faith, and I said, absolutely not. So I remember getting in my truck after I got the kids in, and I called my dad and I told him what happened. He was so mad. He goes, he was lucky I wasn't there. I'd have knocked the shit out of him. He said. So I said, all right, Dad, I'm coming. Well, everybody followed me down the interstate. My dad and I were weaving in and out of traffic, trying to lose them. The whole family were following me and Dad about 80, 90 miles an hour. We were going down the interstate just to get away from them. We drove all night. We finally got to Little Rock, Arkansas. And Dad had asked me, are you tired? So I could see if I could try to sleep. We couldn't sleep. So then we drove all the way home. We were all scared. We didn't know what was gonna happen. We drove. The relief that I had just to see, I've never felt so relieved to see that New Mexico. Welcome to New Mexico sign. I was finally home. Finally, we made it. Chris kept calling, and I avoided him like a plague. Because the judge in Tennessee awarded me custody. He had no jurisdiction over Faith or myself or my other 2 children. And at the time of all this, they brought CPS involved in that case over there. So we get home here, not even a couple days goes by. He ended up calling CPS on us here. And using CPS against me every chance that he got. Showing up to my kids at school. Scaring my kids. Just like he did in Tennessee. So I filed for divorce here, which I should have filed on tribal land at the time. Because I wouldn't be going through this. So the divorce happened, but it dragged on and on and on because Christopher made a big deal about absolutely everything. I had to ask for permission to leave Bernalillo County. I had to tell him what I was doing, and if I left New Mexico, he had to know. I am part Native American, so our reservation is probably about 4 to 5 hours from Albuquerque, and at the time, my grandmother was still alive, so we would go out there to see her, and he really never wanted me to take Faith out there. And on top of that, he really never wanted Faith to be Native American. Christopher knew that I was Mexican American and also Native American, but he hated the fact that, and he still hates the fact that Faith is part Native American. So just everything, he would take me back to court for just everything. It wasn't a good divorce. And the parenting plans, it had to be his way or nobody's way. He had to have the last word, and this is what he wanted, and his attorney made sure that's exactly what he got. A lot of times, I gave in because I wanted it to be over. I didn't want to have to or have somebody dictate what I can and can't do. I mean, I've been a mother for an X amount of years at this time, and it wasn't like, I'm new to all this. But everything had always had to have been Christopher's way. And even though I gave him what he wanted, it was something different. Oh, Faith can't wear leggings, or, just the stupidest things, or, it was dumb. I can't even recall how many hearings I went to with Christopher. It's been horrible. So at this point in time, I didn't really agree to the parenting plan. I didn't like it, but I signed it anyways, just because I wanted it to be over with. The divorce was finally final. And he was still stationed, I believe, in San Diego at this point in time. He was if I'm correct, he was already living with Katie when we were still married. We were going through the divorce, but he had moved in with her. And I was pretty surprised how fast he moved on with his life. Like we never mattered. Like Faith was, like, he never had a family. But I should have known that as well prior to the marriages before me, like how he just moved on so quickly with his life. So he would take Faith out there when she was little, like for 2 weeks or a week. And, you know, Katie and them would be living the family life. I, at the time, did not know Sebastian or Katie. I would just see Katie through FaceTime, where she would be doing something in the background. And I would ask Christopher, like, you know, I would tell him, I can't believe you've moved on with your life so quick. Like who does that? Well, back and forth we would be going, you know, with Faith. And I finally moved on with my life. But Christopher had made a statement the other night on one of the interviews, the podcasts that he was doing. And I didn't like the way he said this. You know, how he called Nina moved in with a man. Like, he knows this person's name. And he deserves to be called his name, not the man. And remind you, I've known Wayne for over 3.5 years. He was my client before we even got exclusive, like being in a relationship, before we even moved in together. He knew I had children. I mean, just so for him to sit there and say that, he basically made it sound like he didn't know this person. He does. So here we are. Faith is 6. I'm still living in this nightmare that he's created. We live in fear every single day. We're constantly watching over our backs. My kids don't even know what a normal childhood should feel like, because they were exposed to all this at a very young age. The awful things that other people could do. My oldest daughter said it best. She said, "Mom, I feel like I was robbed of my childhood because of Chris." Because of everything that he's done. I've had to grow up so quick to protect my siblings. And you protecting us and always living in fear. Being called to the office and wondering if Child Protective Services was there. She's 15 now and still hates to go to the office because of everything that he's done and his family has done. I feel helpless because I feel like I can't protect them enough. And I wish there was more that I can do. We're still living in this nightmare. We're still going to court. He still complains about everything when it's not his way. In the beginning, there was CPS called He used Child Protective Service on me because of the divorce, to get my children taken away from me. He has a friend that works at Albuquerque Police Department as well. That I don't know if he still keeps in contact with him. I believe so. He was told to do a welfare check on us one night, but he didn't take the call, probably because he knew both of us. I mean, I don't know, and I don't know how that would have been used against him either, I guess. Maybe he was worried about that. Just, he's been filing for full custody, Christopher, for about a year to 2 years now, if I recall. A lot of this stuff is just, it doesn't make sense to me. He's made a mess. He tells people that I am unstable, that I need a psychiatric evaluation, that I'm, that I'm pretty much crazy. It's been a nightmare. And the recent one, why he's pushing for full custody, is because I moved Faith out of Bosque Farms Elementary to a Native American academy in Albuquerque, where my youngest son goes and my oldest daughter goes down the street to a high school, and it's a minute away. So I was trying to make the commute easier for all of us. All my kids are in curricular activities. My son's in football. My Faith cheers for her brother's Yaffle football team. So practice. My 2 older girls are in Mexican folk dancing. Faith and her older sister are in Mexican folk dancing. My children are in 4-H. So my kids are super busy, and I work in the city as well. So trying to make my life easier, I decided to put her there. And he did not like that, him and his attorney. So they're pushing for full custody about that. I mean, I can't even recall how many other nonsense issues have been brought up. My children, myself, I mean, I'm over it. I'm tired. This has worn my whole entire family down, my children, myself. This is like the first thing I think of when I wake up, and the last thing I think about when I go to sleep. There's no words to explain this feeling. I mean, and on top of that, we were supposed to go to trial March 5th, I believe it was. March 5th, and the first one, March 5th. I went to court January 2nd of 2024. Continuing cases, I had to pay for his attorney fees because I pulled Faith out of Bosque Farms. Although I contacted him through email, he never replied to me. I contacted my lawyer at the time, never replied to me. So what was I supposed to do? I mean, I had to do what was in best interest for Faith and everybody else. So I ended up paying the legal fee for Christopher because his lawyer complained about that. So then we went to trial. We got a date for trial. Boy, I was furious when I left my lawyer's office. I feel like I hire all these lawyers that just don't that never took the bat for Faith and listened to anything that I have ever said. I've always told people in the past, the people that were working for Faith and myself, the kind of person that Christopher really was. Nobody listened. I mean, he's hurt my children. He's hurt my son. He's backhanded my son as well and busted his nose open when he was 3 in the car seat in San Diego. He's did that to my daughter. He's hurt Faith in the car seat, like I said. It's fallen on dead ears. It's coming up on 7 years. Nobody listens to me. Nobody knows the pain that a mother that I've went through. Nobody knows that I live in fear. It's like back and forth. It's like a game to Christopher with Faith. Christopher dangles Faith over my head as if she's like some kind of toy to be played with. She's not a toy. She's a little girl that has feelings and strong feelings. We can't help the fact that Christopher decided to move to Tennessee. He chose that for himself. I've never known of a person that lives in a whole different state and still dictates what you can and can't do to the other parent. He had a choice to live here. He was actually told to move here by the judge. But he lives in Tennessee. He tells me pretty much what I can and can't do still to this day by that court order. So, going back to the trial, was getting prepared. And I get the call. I get a call. And at this point in time, I'm not talking to Christopher. We don't, I want to make that loud and clear. We do not have a good co-parenting relationship. We don't talk on a regular basis. I refuse to talk to Christopher because everything has to be his way. I don't entertain any of his conversations. In the past, when I used to, and I thought that a relationship between him and I, and we're learning how to co-parent and it's good, it backfired. It kicked me in my ass. Everything that I told, he used against me in court all the time. Every single thing. So I had to learn not to trust him. I've had to, I don't talk to him. So for him to say on some of his podcasts is that we have good, parenting skills, or we don't know how to talk to each other. I refuse to communicate with this man. So he calls me that Wednesday, and he's like, and I was like, oh great, he's calling. So I just went straight to voicemail. And then he had said 911. Call me. So then I was like, well, it must be emergency, so let me call him. I called him and I said, what's up, Chris? And he was like, he's like, Nina, I gotta tell you something. And I was like, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, he's going to tell me that the trial, we're not going to go to trial, that everything is going to be done with, and we don't need to worry, and we can, we don't need to do all this stuff. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. And then he tells me, I got to be open and honest with you. And then he pauses like for 6 or 7 seconds, and I'm like, I was like, what? What do you have to tell me? So then at that point in time, he tells me that Sebastian went missing. And I was speechless. I have to say, I was speechless. And then I went into saying, well, what happened? Like, how did he go missing? Like, what happened? And he said, well, he went missing between 12:30 and 6 a.m. And I'm like, it's thinking to myself, and then, like, that's crazy. And I said, don't you have security cameras, Christopher? I said, you have security cameras in your house? Don't you? And he paused. He didn't say anything. So then I said, what happened to your dogs? They said, don't your dogs? They said, you have those Yorkies, or... And I said, every time that I call Faith, they said they're barking. He didn't say nothing. So I said, I said, are you lying to me? I said, because, thinking in my head, like, are you just buying more time for this trial that's coming up? Like, what other information are you going to find out that you're going to use against me, right? So then I said, I'm going to look this up. And I said, have you contacted your lawyer yet? I said, we still have a trial, I said, at 8:30 next Tuesday. And he had raised his voice at me, and he said, we're not going. And I was like, don't raise your voice at me. You're not going to disrespect me like that. You're not going to raise your voice at me. So then I said, by law, I said, I have to contact my attorney. And I said, I'm going to email him as soon as I get off the phone with you. And I'm going to tell him that there's a missing child. And I had stated, like, okay, well, is there like something, we could do? Can you send me like a flyer? Can you send me something? I said, I could put it on my social media and it'll take off. Like, I have a lot of people that I know and a lot of my clientele. I said, we're willing to, they share a lot of my stuff. So he never sent me anything. And, he was so worried about his phone, and he had said something. He's like, the fucking cops had my phone, and I had to call Faith, and I told him I had to fucking call my daughter. And I said, Christopher, I said, you need to calm down. I said, Faith is fine. She's with me. I'm her mother. I said, she was with her family here. I said, you don't need to worry about her. You don't need to worry about her whatsoever. And and he wanted to say more, and he repeated himself again, and he said, I need to be honest with you. And I was like, Christopher, I don't have time for this. I said, I just don't. I said, I gotta go. And that was it, the conversation that I had with him. I keep kind of beating myself up. Maybe I should have stayed on the phone a little bit longer. Maybe I should have let him talk. But with the experiences that I've had with Christopher in the past, I just couldn't trust him. So then I contacted my attorney the next day, and I told him what was going on with Sebastian. I was hoping that, and I keep hoping, and we're praying every single day for his return home. But the more and more days that had passed by, the more and more that I got, like, oh my God, like, this is crazy. Like, and the things that didn't make sense to me was why Christopher and Katie aren't looking for Sebastian. I don't know, but I know if one of my babies went missing, I'd be out there searching night and day. I don't know how somebody could just sit at home and just wait for your baby to return. When I'd be out there looking every single second, I'd be out there by horseback. I'd be out there by a golf cart, by whatever I can get my hands on to get into the forest and look, or wherever in these neighborhoods, wherever I could possibly go. I'd still be wearing the same clothes that my son or daughter went missing in. I'd be running on adrenaline. All I could think about is the time that happened to me when they took Faith from me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even drink water. I lost so much weight. And I knew where my baby was at. And this hits home for us because of Faith. Faith's known Sebastian pretty much half of her life, or her whole entire life. I feel for Seth. I feel for his family, the Rogers family. I'm in shock. I can't believe this has happened. And Faith asks me, and she talks about Sebastian, and she asks me, Mama, are they gonna find him? And I tell her, yeah. I've talked to Seth on a parent-to-parent level. And we talked about some things that, we shed some tears together, and just the pain in his voice. It hurts. But I feel like people now want to listen to me. People now want to hear my voice when I've been saying the hurtful things that were done to my children and to myself. Nobody wanted to listen to me before. And now that this baby is missing, you want to listen to me now? You want to ask me questions now? Like, I feel helpless. Like, I don't know what to even think anymore. I see all these things that are being said, and the things that people say, and they have every right to say that. They have every right to speculate. Just like I have. I've there's so many things that I've thought about in my head, but I mean, I've saw the things. I've sat back for a month literally and watched everything and followed every possible thing that I can, listened to what people have said, podcasts, like everything. And I needed for my voice and my story to be heard of my experiences with the Proudfoots and Christopher and Katie. Katie jumped on that bandwagon, or that Christopher and everybody else was on. Just like this past December 27th, Faith was going out to Hendersonville to see her family for the holidays. We drove over to the airport. We were all happy. We all got out. Isabella, Noah, Wayne, myself. Got her out of the truck and we said our goodbyes. We hugged her. We kissed her. There's Katie standing there recording everything like she always does. And I hug my baby tight. I tell her I love her. And we prayed. We asked God to keep Faith safe and bring her home safe to us. So as she went with Katie, I had somebody that Christopher, Katie, and his lawyer hired. His name is Michael Tinker. He served me with paper. And he tapped on my window when I just rolled it down. And he said, "Are you so-and-so Gomez?" I said, "Yes." "Why?" He said, "Because you've been served." And the first thing I thought of was, they're going to take Faith. I got out of that truck so fast and I ran into the airport. And I was yelling through the airport that she was going to kidnap Faith. Katie and Faith were standing at the Southwest counter. And I told them, I said, "She's going to kidnap my baby." I grabbed Faith on the left side of her hand and I ran with her through the airport. And all I could think about is, I got to get back to the truck. And here comes Wayne, Noah, and Isabel running through the airport just to come and see what was happening. And oh my God, my mom, like first thing she thought of was like, and Wayne thought was like, oh my God, Nina's gonna just lay her out. I ran by, and Katie was coming right up behind me, and the guy, Michael Tinker, he stood there trying to flag me down and still trying to serve me with paperwork. In that moment, I'm just thinking about, they're going to take my baby and I'm never going to see her again. So I got to the truck. I called APD. During the holiday season, APD's at the airport. So they came within like 5 minutes. Officer Cordova had showed up and was talking about asking questions like what was happening and asked if I had a parenting plan on hand. And I'm like, wait, I mean, when I was just supposed to carry my parenting plan? I mean, And he said, is it his time sharing or yours? And I said, it's his. But I said, why am I being served? And still at this point, Michael Tinker was still trying to give me my paperwork and I wouldn't take it. So he got very upset, lifted up the windshield wipers and threw the paperwork right under there. At this point, my kids are crying. I'm crying hysterically. And there's Katie smiling away and recording everything. Then the officer's like, Ms. Gomez, you have a court date coming up. And if you don't want the judge to be upset with you, you need to let her go. So I get back out of the truck. And we all do. And I get down to Faith's level. And I tell her how much I love her. And that mommy's gonna always keep fighting for you. And don't ever for 1 second think that mommy does not love you. I hug her so tight. Because I don't know if that's the last time I was going to see my baby. I handed her off to Katie. And she left. I could barely breathe when I got back in the truck. Trying to think about, what do I do now? What do I do if she doesn't come home? How am I gonna get her home? Faith stopped. And she looked at the truck driving away, and Wayne looked back, and she probably thought, is that the last time I'm going to see my family? That whole day, my whole world was turned upside down. I thought about everything that played in my head, like a movie. That day was hard. I came home and I curled up in a ball. I didn't want nobody to bother me. Because I'm thinking about, how am I going to have enough money to get a lawyer or anything like that? So what they did was they hired that server to come and serve me with a court hearing that I already knew about. The one that was going to take place January 2nd. So Christopher's lawyer, Christopher, Katie, they all knew what they were doing. They premeditated this again. They wanted me to go crazy. They wanted me to say hurtful things so they can go back to the courthouse and to the judge and say that I was unstable, that I'm mentally, something's wrong. But in my mind, and I brought back trauma. And now, I mean, we're at this point where Sebastian is missing. And everybody, you know, the judge and, you know, other people are telling me, don't talk about this issue in front of Faith. She's too young, she's traumatized. Christopher doesn't talk about that to her. He doesn't tell her that her stepbrother is missing. Not once has he said anything to her about it. I think Faith needs to be aware of what's happening. She did talk to Sebastian when she had FaceTimed Chris and he was at his house. She knows him. I really don't know what to say at this point. Like with Sebastian missing and the situation with Faith, it's been an ongoing situation. I was unaware that Sebastian's father was getting him. I was unaware that he was going to live with his father permanently. Finally, that was disclosed to me about a week and a half ago. I was in shock because I went like, how can you know that you're getting your child for full custody? Like, I mean, you and Katie were preparing for this. You're giving away one kid to get another one. Like, I never understood that. I still don't understand that. I was in shock when I heard that, and I also, you know, it's sickening to think that, and to think that you would be getting a child. Why would you take Faith away from everything that she knows? Her mom, her siblings. She calls Wayne dad. She says, that's my daddy, Wayne. Her grandparents, like everything. I don't, you know, I was lost, and now the more and more I find out, it just makes my stomach turn even more. Like, going back to this court hearing that we had, we never got an extension on the restraining order. But I believe that we should have. I did, because I don't know what Christopher nor Katie or the Proudfoots are capable of doing. It's, for all I know, they could take Faith from school. I do right now have temporary full custody of Faith till we go back to court. I mean, I talked to Seth. And I've always told him, I reach out to him and I let him know, you know, we're here, whatever you need. Let us know how we can help you. But I remember him telling me the first night that I reached out to him, or he reached out to me, and he said, you can help Sebastian and you can help me by keeping Faith there and keeping her safe. When you hear that from another parent and the situation that's going on, what do you say? Like, I'm doing the best that I can, but it's the justice system here. My biggest fear is that somebody's gonna make the wrong decision for Faith and she goes out there. And what am I gonna do? What if something like this happens to my baby? Are you gonna tell me I'm sorry, Miss Gomez? I made the wrong decision? The justice system has failed a lot of kids, has failed my kids, and it also fails Sebastian. I've been fighting this since Faith was a newborn, and I'm still fighting it. I don't know what it's gonna take. I don't really think anybody really cares the decisions that they make for children, because it's not happening in their personal family. They don't know somebody. It doesn't hit home. It'll never happen to them. A lot of these people always tell me, don't show your feelings in court. Don't be emotional. So I'm just supposed to sit there without feelings, without crying, without telling people how I really feel. I feel like a lot of these also, because there wasn't enough creamer in their coffee for, you know, a lot of these judges that make these decisions, and maybe they got angry that morning or whatever the circumstances are. They make bad choices for a lot of these children. And I won't let Faith be one of them. I will always fight for Faith, like I have been.
All right.
wish people would open up their eyes and listen to when people are saying it's not a good idea. I don't think they're stable. I don't think that they're a healthy parent. I just,
I think it's wrapping up, folks.
Because look at what happened to Sebastian. And I feel for him because I'm a mom of a 15-year-old daughter. I hope and we pray every single day for his safe return. If there's anything that I would say to everybody is look out for one another, look out for your kids.
If you are interested in our future coverage of this story, be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell before you go. Verdict Vantage, thanks you for supporting our continued news coverage and research.
Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for more breaking stories, and remember, email verdictvantage@gmail.com with all of your video requests.